It was late on a Wednesday night, the kind of hour when the city feels like it is holding its breath. Streetlights stretched long shadows across empty roads, and the hum of traffic had dwindled to almost nothing. Most people were at home, either fast, asleep, or drifting between dreams and silence. But not everyone. A black SUV rolled steadily along the outskirts of the city, its windows tinted enough to offer privacy, but not mystery. The woman behind the wheel was calm-focused. She had driven these routes many times before her name was Colonel Amelia Torres. A decorated officer with 2 decades of service under her belt, she was no stranger to high stakes or long hours. Her uniform rested neatly on the seat beside her, folded with precision. Every crease, every detail in place. She wasn't in it now, but anyone who had ever seen her in command knew the weight it carried. Amelia had spent her evening locked in meetings about logistics deployments and planning work that stretched well. Beyond paperwork and numbers, lives depended on her choices. She carried that responsibility quietly, firmly. It was the kind of strength that didn't need to announce itself. As she drove home, the world outside seemed unremarkable until the sudden flash of red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. A police cruiser. The siren chirped once short sharp. A signal to pull over. Amelia blinked steady and smooth before guiding her SUV to the shoulder. She wasn't speeding, wasn't swerving. Her record behind the wheel was flawless. So why the stop? The cruiser door opened and the officer stepped out tall, broad, moving with a swagger that made the night air feel heavier than it had seconds before. His flashlight beam cut across her windshield, before snapping directly into her eyes. He didn't approach the passenger side as training often advised. He came straight to her door, license and registration. His tone clipped commanding without greeting, without explanation. Amelia kept both hands on the wheel. Visible, deliberate years of discipline made her every movement measured. She lowered her window halfway. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" "You were drifting between lanes," he said flatly. "Looked like you might be impaired." Amelia tilted her head slightly steady as stone. "I wasn't." She reached slowly into the glove box, handed over her documents, but added calmly, "This is a government vehicle. I'm a federal officer." The man squinted at the ID, but his smirk barely shifted. "Doesn't mean you're above the law." Amelia's jaw set. "Not claiming I am." His eyes narrowed a little sharper this time. "Step out of the car." The chill in his voice wasn't about safety, it was about control. And in that moment, Amelia knew this encounter was going to be more than a routine stop. It was about to become a test of dignity, of power, and of who would walk away. Unshaken, Amelia opened the door slowly, her movements crisp, deliberate, as though even stepping onto the pavement was part of some quiet choreography. She didn't slam it shut. She didn't rush. Instead, she stood tall, her shoulders squared. The calm authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in deserts and jungles, now facing the piercing beam of a flashlight on an empty roadside. The officer's nameplate read, "Mercer, Sergeant Mercer." He stood with one hand hovering near his holster, the other gripping his light like a weapon. His posture screamed suspicion, but his eyes told a different story. Ego, the kind that feeds on intimidation and silence. "Walk a straight line," he barked, pointing toward the faded stripes in the asphalt. Amelia glanced at the ground, then back at him, her expression unreadable but firm. "I haven't been drinking." She kept her voice, even controlled. Mercer smirked, didn't ask walk. Lesser person might have bristled, snapped back, maybe pleaded. Amelia did none of those things. She simply nodded and began placing one foot in front of the other. Each step was precise, measured as though she were back in basic training, demonstrating form in front of recruits. Her balance was flawless, her steps steady. There was no hesitation, no stumble, no slur in her voice when she counted aloud as instructed. Mercer's jaw flexed, but his smirk never faltered. He didn't want her to pass, he wanted her to break. when she completed the test and stood silently waiting for his next demand. The silence between them stretched tight like a rope ready to snap. Still he scribbled on his notepad, tearing a ticket free and shoving it toward her. "Failure to maintain lane," he said with a kind of satisfaction that felt less like justice and more like spite. Amelia accepted the paper without flinching, tucking it neatly into her jacket. She didn't argue, didn't beg, but as she opened the driver's door, she paused, turned back and said calmly, "Just so we're clear, this entire interaction has been recorded." For the first time, Mercer's eyes flickered just a fraction of hesitation, but arrogance reclaimed him quickly. He chuckled under his breath. "Good for you, ma'am. Drive safe." She slid back into her SUV, closed the door with measured quiet, and pulled away. The headlights cut through the darkness ahead, but Amelia wasn't just driving home anymore. She was replaying every moment in her mind. Every word, every gesture, every time his hand hovered just a little too close to his weapon. Mercer thought he had written the final line of their encounter. A ticket, filed, logged, forgotten. But Amelia Torres wasn't the kind of woman who let power games go unchecked, especially not when the stakes were bigger than her own pride. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about the next person who might not walk away so calmly, and what Mercer didn't know yet was that the real battle had only just begun. The morning sun cut across Amelia's blinds sharp strips of light against a room that had seen too many restless nights. She sat at her desk already in uniform, her medals polished, her collar stiff and perfect. The ticket Mercer had written lay flat in front of her untouched except for the crease where she'd folded it once last night. Most people would have tossed it in the glove box and cursed under their breath for a few days before paying the fine. But Amelia Torres was not most people. 20 years in the Army had taught her that silence rarely solved anything, especially when arrogance wore a badge. She replayed the stop in her mind, every clipped command, every condescending tone, every moment where Mercer had tried to force control, not out of duty, but out of ego. Her fingers tapped the desk once, twice. Then she reached for her phone and opened the video file. The recording was steady, clear, undeniable. She watched herself comply, watched Mercer escalate, watched him scribble the ticket anyway. It wasn't just wrong. It was a pattern she had seen in others before. Unchecked power feeding on intimidation. Her aide knocked lightly on the door. "Captain Torres," he said, voice careful. "You wanted the JAG number." She nodded without looking up. "Slide it under." The envelope slipped across the desk. She picked it up, eyes scanning the contact info before dialing. Each ring echoed like a drumbeat until the line clicked. A measured voice answered, "Office of the Judge Advocate General. This is Price speaking." Amelia introduced herself, crisp, direct. No embellishments, no dramatics. She laid out the facts, date, time, location, and then offered the recording. When she finished, there was silence on the other end. Then Price spoke slowly. "That's more than enough to open a review. If you're willing to move forward, I wouldn't be calling if I wasn't," she replied, her tone calm but steel. Hidden beneath, within the hour, Nindidiati. Complaint was filed formally attached to both her statement and the video record. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need headlines. She needed accountability. And accountability had a paper trail. Meanwhile, across town, Sergeant Mercer lounged in the precinct break room, his boots propped on a chair while a rookie listened. Wide-eyed, Mercer chuckled. She tried flashing some federal ID, thought it meant something. He shook his head, amused. "People think rank on paper matters out here. On the street, it's my word that counts." The rookie laughed nervously, but his eyes flicked away. Mercer didn't notice. He was too busy basking in his own narrative, too convinced that the road belonged to him. But by the end of the week, whispers began circulating through the halls about a complaint about video footage about a name attached to both Amelia Torres. Mercer shrugged it off like he always did, brushing past the sideways glances, telling himself it would blow over. But this time was different, because Amelia had pulled the one lever that his arrogance had never accounted for. Discipline matched, with documentation, and that combination was about to drag him somewhere he couldn't control. A courtroom. The courthouse in downtown Toledo stood like a slab of gray stone against the skyline, a place where reputations cracked and truths came crawling into daylight. On the morning of the hearing, Amelia Torres stepped out of her SUV in full uniform. Her boots hit the pavement with the kind of certainty that didn't need an audience but caught one anyway. Reporters weren't there not yet, but other eyes where soldiers from her base had taken the morning off to sit in the gallery, quiet pillars of respect in pressed uniforms. A few civilians trickled in, two curious onlookers with no stake in the outcome, but drawn to the gravity of the case. Word had spread not in headlines, but in whispers. An officer had stopped the wrong woman. Inside the courtroom, Sergeant Mercer sat at the defense table, his suit stiff shoulders squared but his jaw tight. He wasn't smirking today. He drummed his fingers once against the polished wood before shoving them into his lap. His attorney leaned in, whispered strategy, but Mercer wasn't listening. His eyes kept flicking to the door, waiting for her. When Amelia entered the room, the air shifted. Her ribbons caught the light. Her presence commanded silence. She didn't strut, didn't glare. She simply walked with the calm weight of someone who had nothing to prove. The judge cleared his throat, calling the case Wallace v. Mercer, a formal complaint, alleging unlawful detainment, intimidation, and abuse of authority. The words echoed against the high ceiling, settling heavy over the rows of seats. Amelia was called first. She adjusted her collar once, then stepped into the witness box. Each answer was crisp, uncluttered. I was driving within the speed limit. I was not impaired. I complied with every lawful request. I asked for clarification when ordered to leave the vehicle. Her voice never wavered, not even when the defense lawyer tried to twist. Her words, Lieutenant Colonel, isn't it true that officers have discretion during stops? Yes, discretion, she answered, but discretion without discipline becomes abuse. The jury scribbled furiously, pens scratching across yellow pads. Then came the video. First, her phone footage. Then Mercer's own body cam, side by side projected on the wall. The jurors leaned forward. The judge frowned slightly. The gallery sat frozen, watching Mercer's clipped tone, his hand hovering near his weapon. The unnecessary commands every second framed by Amelia's calm compliance. Mercer shifted in his seat, his throat tightening. The sound of his own voice played back to him, cold, unyielding. It was no longer just his word against hers. It was his word against the truth. Cross-examination ended, but the damage lingered. The courtroom had seen the reality stripped of ego, stripped of excuses. The badge he wore so proudly looked smaller now, not because it had changed, but because the man behind it had been exposed. When Amelia stepped down from the stand, she didn't glance at Mercer. She didn't need to. The jury had already seen what she wanted them to see, and Mercer, for the first time in years, sat in silence, knowing control was slipping from his hands. The second day of testimony opened with a tension so thick it clung to the walls like smoke. The jury shuffled into place, their expressions guarded, but their eyes sharper now. The projection screen still lingered at the front, its glow a reminder of the damning footage they had seen the day before. This time it was Mercer's turn. His attorney rose his voice even, but edged with unease. Sergeant Mercer, please take the stand. Mercer adjusted his tie and walked stiffly across the room. Each step sounded heavier than the last, as if the soles of his shoes were sinking into the polished wood. When he sat, the defense lawyer began carefully, "You have served this community for over 15 years, correct?" "Yes," Mercer replied, jaw tight, "and in that time, have you ever been disciplined for misconduct?" "No, not formally," the attorney nodded, trying to steady the ground beneath his client. "Then let's discuss the stop on January 17th. Why did you pull over?" Lieutenant Colonel Torres Mercer shifted uncomfortably. I observed her drifting between lanes. She seemed impaired, so I conducted a stop. The lawyer pressed. "And what led you to escalate the situation to a sobriety test?" Mercer hesitated, then gave a rehearsed answer. It's standard procedure when a driver raises suspicion. The prosecutor rose immediately, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Standard procedure. Sergeant, would you say it's standard to open a driver's door without permission when they are fully compliant? Mercer's throat bobbed. No, not always. But you did, in this case, didn't you? Yes. And is it standard to raise your voice at someone who is calm and respectful? Mercer's lips parted, but no sound came. Yes or no? Sergeant. No, he muttered finally. The prosecutor paced slowly. Before the jury, Sergeant Mercer at any point during this stop did Ms. Torres refuse a lawful order. Mercer clenched his fists. No. Did she threaten you in any way? No. Did she resist arrest or attempt to flee? No. So why escalate the stop, Mercer's? Silence was louder than any confession. The prosecutor leaned closer. Was it because she asked questions? Mercer's jaw tightened. Was it because she didn't react the way you wanted? Mercer finally snapped. She challenged me. She acted like my authority. Didn't matter. The words slipped raw, unpolished. His attorney closed his eyes. The damage done. The jury leaned forward as the prosecutor delivered the final blow, so it wasn't about safety. It was about control. The room went still. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. Mercer looked down. His face flushed his badge invisible under the plain suit that no longer shielded him. Amelia watched from her seat, her expression unreadable. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply observed like a soldier who had seen battles won not by rage, but by patience. The scales of the courtroom had tipped and everyone could feel it. By the time Mercer stepped down, the once untouchable officer looked smaller. His shoulders slouched his. Confidence fractured. He had walked into the courtroom a man armored in years of authority. He sat back down, a man stripped bare, exposed not by force, but by truth. The third day of the trial carried a weight that even the courthouse air couldn't shake. The benches creaked under the weight of spectators who had come not for spectacle, but because word had spread that something rare was happening here. Accountability was on trial. Not just one man. Amelia walked into the room in her full dress. Uniform, crisp lines, ribbons, polished boots clicking against the tile. The room hushed not out of formality but respect. Even those who didn't know her rank understood instinctively that she carried herself with a presence Mercer could never manufacture. She moved to her seat calmly without a glance at him while Mercer sat at the defense table jaw set, but eyes darting every few seconds. The prosecutor began closing arguments. Clear, deliberate, measured, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. What you have seen is not a simple traffic stop. You've seen an officer abuse authority, escalate without cause, and attempt to intimidate a citizen who complied at every turn. Amelia Torres did not resist, did not threaten, did not break the law. What she did was ask questions, reasonable questions. Questions that should never be treated as defiance. The footage played again. Not the whole thing, just moments clipped together. Mercer's hand hovering near his holster, his voice sharp, his demand. Louder. Amelia's. Voice calm, steady her phone, recording proof of everything. The prosecutor's voice echoed. This is not protocol. This is pride, masking as authority. This is why we are here. Then the defense rose, his tone lower, almost pleading. Sergeant Mercer has served this city for 15 years. He has written thousands of tickets, responded to hundreds of calls. He made a mistake. Yes, but should one mistake erase a career? He asked the jury to weigh mercy against judgment. His words carried effort, but not conviction. Even his voice trembled when he looked at the panel. The jury listened without reaction, scribbling notes, but their silence spoke volumes. The defense sat down. Mercer leaned forward, whispering furiously into his attorney's ear. But the damage had been done. The image of him snapping about control hung in the air like smoke no lawyer could clear. The judge gave instructions and the jury filed out to deliberate. The room exhaled. Amelia folded her hands on the table. her face calm, but her mind sharp, replaying the night's events and everything that had led her here. Mercer, meanwhile, shifted. In his chair, his knee bouncing the first cracks in his confidence spreading wide. His world had always told him the badge was enough. Now he was beginning to wonder if it would shield him. Any more, minutes stretched into hours, the courtroom waiting. In a silence that felt almost sacred, Amelia sat still a statue of discipline. Mercer fidgeted, drowning in his own impatience. The whispers from the gallery grew hushed fragments about power, about respect, about change, when the door finally opened, and the jury began to file back and the entire room rose. The foreman clutched a slip of paper folded once and heavy with consequence. Mercer's breath hitched for the first time, his bravado gone replaced by the pale realization that his untouchable shield might shatter in front of everyone. The courtroom was silent as the jury foreman unfolded the slip of paper. The judge cleared his throat, eyes steady on the panel, and asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreman nodded, his voice steady, but deliberate. "Yes, Your Honor." Every seat in the room creaked as people leaned forward. Amelia sat still. Hands folded, her expression composed. Mercer gripped the edge of the defense table, his knuckles pale with tension. For the first time, his trademark smirk had disappeared, replaced by the look of a man bracing for impact. The foreman read, "We the jury, in the case of Torres versus Mercer, find in favor of the plaintiff." The words landed with the weight of a hammer against steel, deliberate, undeniable, irreversible. A ripple spread through the gallery. Quiet gasps, muffled sighs, the shifting of feet. People had been waiting for this, waiting to see if the truth would cut through the shield of authority that Mercer had always hidden behind. The judge leaned forward, the official decision rolling from his lips. "This court recognizes that Sergeant Daniel Mercer violated the constitutional rights of Lieutenant Colonel Amelia Torres during the unlawful stop and subsequent detainment. His actions did not align with professional conduct or departmental policy. The ruling shall remain on public record, and the plaintiff is entitled to damages in the amount of $50,000. Mercer's shoulders slumped, the final wall of arrogance crumbling. His attorney touched his arm, whispering something about appeals, but Mercer barely reacted. The badge that had once made him untouchable now felt like a weight pulling him under. Every eye in the room saw him not as an authority figure, but as a man stripped of the illusion he had built for years. Amelia inhaled slowly, her composure unshaken. She had not come for money. She had not come for headlines. She had come for accountability, and the verdict gave her exactly that. She gave a small nod. Not to the judge, not even to the jury, but to herself. It was quiet vindication, the kind that does not scream but stands firm like bedrock. The judge adjourned the case with a bang of the gavel. The sound echoed off the wood panels, sharp final. Mercer stood slowly clutching the folder of documents but avoiding every gaze reporters had already gathered outside their cameras, waiting, questions ready. He covered his face with one hand and hurried for the exit, his arrogance replaced by shame. Amelia, however, did not rush. She rose with calm discipline, adjusted her uniform, and thanked her counsel. Her steps toward the door were steady, not triumphant, not boastful, simply resolute. She was not walking away from victory. She was walking toward the next step, the unspoken promise that what had happened would not be buried. Outside the courthouse, the air was charged. Cameramen clicked microphones, stretched voices clamored for quotes. Amelia paused briefly, her gaze unwavering. "I did not do this for myself," she said evenly. "I did this because authority without accountability is dangerous." That was all. No theatrics, no speeches, just truth delivered as simply as her testimony inside. The crowd quieted. Some nodded. Some whispered. But one thing was clear: Mercer thought his badge made him untouchable, but the gavel had proved otherwise. The days after the verdict carried a strange kind of quiet for Amelia. She returned to her base the next morning, as if nothing had happened, but everyone who saw her knew everything had changed. Her soldiers greeted her with subtle nods of respect, a deeper acknowledgement than rank alone could command. They had watched her stand against a system that often felt immovable, and they saw her prove that. Strength isn't just about battles fought overseas, it is about battles fought in silence, in courtrooms on dark roads where dignity is tested. Mercer, on the other hand, vanished from public view. The whispers in his precinct grew louder. The shield of untouchable authority that had protected him for years was cracked beyond repair. A statement from his department announced he had been placed on leave pending internal review. The language was sterile, but the message was clear. The system that once ignored his behavior could no longer look away, but for Amelia, the outcome was never about his punishment. It was about principle. She sat alone in her office one evening, the faint glow of her desk lamp highlighting a small photo of her younger self in uniform, fresh-faced, full of hope. She thought about all the people who had been silenced by fear, who had swallowed injustice because they believed no one would believe them. She thought about the young recruits she would stand in front of, one day teaching them not just tactics and discipline but integrity and courage. A week later, she did just that. Standing before a room of new cadets, she posed a simple question. How many of you believe authority automatically earns you respect? A few hands went up, hesitant, tentative. Amelia let the silence stretch, then answered herself. Respect is not given because of a title or a badge. Respect is proven every single day by the way you treat people, by the way you uphold responsibility. Power without discipline is just arrogance, and arrogance will always collapse under the weight of truth. The recruits leaned forward listening, not because she demanded it, but because she embodied it. They had seen her story in the news. They had heard the verdict, and now they heard the lesson straight from her lips. Leadership isn't about making others small. It is about raising the standard for everyone. When the session ended, she walked away quietly, just as she always did. No applause, no spotlight. But in that quiet, she carried something stronger than recognition. She carried proof that standing firm, even when the odds are stacked high, even when the world tells you to be silent, is how real change begins. So, let her story be a reminder. Authority without accountability is fragile. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. And courage sometimes looks like simply refusing to back down when it matters most. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of truth and integrity, do not let it fade. Share it, stand with it, and let it inspire you to find your own courage. And if you want more stories of resilience, justice, and people who refuse to be silenced, make sure you subscribe, because every story we tell carries the same message: you are never powerless when you choose to stand up.